Everyone has a night that should have been the end, not just a bad day, not just another sleepless stretch of time, but a night so deep, so still, that even your thoughts echo like footsteps in an abandoned house. It's the moment where the script collapses, the one you didn't write but somehow kept acting out perfectly, convincingly, as if it was yours. And yet something inside you was screaming, not loudly, no, louder than that. It screamed in silence, through the apathy, through the fake smiles, through the thousands of moments where you nodded but weren't there. This is the night of truth, not because it gives you answers, but because it takes everything else away. Your identity feels like a costume you forgot to take off. Your desires feel inherited, second-hand, not chosen, performed. And meaning? It flickers, like the last light in a room you don't want to leave, but can't stand anymore. Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. He wasn't talking about shadow in the poetic sense. He meant the real stuff, the ugly memories, the guilt, the raw anger, the numbing shame, the questions you buried so deep they became part of your posture. Schopenhauer added, life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. This night, this collapse is what hangs in the center, the space between the two, where the soul neither fights nor flees. It simply feels for the first time. And in that stillness, something terrifying and liberating begins to whisper. Maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it's the only moment real enough for you to finally stop performing, to stop obeying the roles, to stop pretending you're not exhausted. Maybe this is the doorway, not the kind with lights and glory, but the kind that looks like ruin and leads to something ancient, yourself, before the mask, before the noise, before the edits. So I'll ask you what no one else does. What if your crisis is the only moment honest enough to become who they told you you couldn't be? This night, your night, might be the one that breaks you, or the one that births you, and the only difference is whether you're willing to listen to what you hear. When the silence gets loud, the life you're living isn't yours. It's a badly interpreted role. You don't remember when you started pretending. Maybe it was the first time you were praised for being well-behaved, or when someone's disappointment taught you that love had conditions. Since then, you've become an actor, a method one, so deep in character that you forgot there was ever a script before this one. You became the obedient child, the invisible friend, the high-functioning adult who knows how to smile while collapsing inside. You perform exhaustion like it's a badge. You perform silence like it's maturity. You perform success, not for joy, but to delay the shame of feeling like a failure. And deep down, you know, this isn't living. It's surviving someone else's expectations. Tarantino never wrote heroes. He wrote broken characters who bled their pain into every scene. Because he understood, the moment you stop writing your own script, you become a background character in someone else's trauma. The roles we inherit aren't random. They are survival codes. Strategies carved in childhood to avoid rejection, humiliation, abandonment. You weren't born voiceless. You learned silence kept you safe. You weren't born agreeable. You adapted to be liked. You weren't born disconnected. You trained yourself not to feel too much because feeling got you hurt. And now that mask has melted into your skin. The world sees your personality. But it's not who you are. It's who you became, to not be left behind. There's a dissonance between the life you're acting and the truth you buried. That's what's making you tired, not just physically, existentially, because the soul, your real self, doesn't care how well you perform. It only asks one thing. When are you going to stop playing a role and start being the author? The fear isn't of failure, it's of trying and still feeling unworthy. You say you're lazy, that you lack discipline, that you always put things off. But that's not true, is it? Because you don't procrastinate everything, only the things that matter, only the things that expose you, only the things where, if you fail, it won't just be a task undone. It'll feel like proof that maybe you were never enough. That's not laziness, that's fear, the kind of fear that wraps itself in silence, that avoids beginnings, that delays dreams not because they're too far, but because reaching them might not fix the voice that says you're still not worthy. This is the hidden truth of self-sabotage. You're not afraid of failing. You're afraid that even if you give it everything, even if you bleed for it, the emptiness might still be there. You'll reach the top and still feel hollow, because it was never about success. It was about love, about recognition, about the hope that doing well could finally make the pain stop. Tarantino's characters stumble, rage, break. They're violent, chaotic, real. They try and fail and try again. But not because they believe in victory, because it's the only way they know how to breathe. They remind us that perfection is not the point, that realness lives in the cracks. And maybe that's where worth begins, not in being flawless, but in being fearless enough to show up broken. So here's a question that doesn't demand an answer, only presence. If you could fail today without being judged, what would you try? If the outcome didn't define your worth, would you finally let yourself begin? Or are you still trying to earn the love that should have never been conditional? The voice you keep running from is your own. You wake up and reach for your phone, not because there's something urgent, but because the silence feels heavier than the noise. You scroll, you click, you play something in the background, anything to avoid hearing what rises when the world goes quiet and no one notices. Because this isn't called addiction, it's called staying updated. It's not called escape, it's called being productive. But deep down, your nervous system knows the truth. You're drowning in stimulation to avoid sinking into yourself. You don't fear boredom. You fear what boredom uncovers. There's a voice inside you, not loud but constant, asking questions you never learned how to answer. Why do you feel so detached from your own life? Why do you only feel alive in extremes, or not at all? Why does stillness feel like a threat? Carl Jung called this the shadow, the rejected parts, the truths you exiled to survive. And Nietzsche whispered a warning for this exact moment: he who has a why can bear almost any how. But in this era of infinite scrolling, we've forgotten our why. We've forgotten what it feels like to live without buffering reality. Distraction isn't just a habit, it's a sedative. It softens the ache, muffles the void. But what if the void isn't your enemy? What if it's your soul knocking? Behind every tab, every playlist, every artificial buzz, there's a silence waiting. And in that silence, something ancient stirs. Not dramatic, not mystical, just real. You. What rises when there's no one to impress? No performance, no tasks, no masks. So if you've forgotten who you are, maybe it's because you haven't been alone with yourself long enough to remember. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. The strength you're proud of is the same thing that's keeping you numb. You were taught to be strong. Strong meant enduring, holding back tears, staying composed, pushing through, even when your chest burned, even when your body begged for pause, even when the silence turned into suffocation. You learned to clench your jaw when it hurt, to say, "I'm fine," like it was a prayer. To carry the weight alone, because asking for help always came with a price. But here's the truth they never told you. That kind of strength is armor. And armor doesn't just protect, it isolates. Tarantino's characters are often brutal, unfiltered, violent, but only because they've been silent too long. Because when pain has nowhere to go, it mutates into anger, into detachment, into performances of control that slowly destroy the person inside. You've built a shell, and maybe it helped. Maybe it kept you safe when you needed it most. But now it's keeping you from breathing, because to stay behind that wall, you have to pretend. Pretend you're okay. Pretend nothing touches you. Pretend you're still that version of yourself who didn't feel this much. But you do feel, you always did. You're not cold. You're just tired of being burned. The world says breaking down is weakness, but the real weakness is living disconnected from your own soul. Because no matter how convincing your mask is, the ache doesn't lie. And deep inside, there's a voice whispering, I want to be real. Even if it hurts, even if it breaks the script, even if no one recognizes me when I finally stop performing. So let me ask you, who are you when no one expects anything from you? Anger is the language pain uses when it's not allowed to speak. You weren't always like this. There was a time when you felt everything fully, the sting, the fear, the softness of disappointment. But somewhere along the way, pain became too risky, too loud, too vulnerable. So you buried it. And what rose in its place wasn't peace, it was pressure. Now you snap over small things. Now sarcasm shields your voice. Now you isolate. Not because you enjoy solitude, but because connection feels like exposure. Tarantino's worlds are filled with rage, but not rage for its own sake. It's not random violence, it's emotional residue. Grief, betrayal, humiliation, all compressed into explosions. Because when pain doesn't have a voice, it finds other ways to be seen. That's what your anger is. A code, a signal, a flare shot from the unconscious. You think you're furious at others, but the truth is harder. You're angry at yourself for not protecting your boundaries. Angry for silencing your instincts. Angry that you had to survive by pretending to be someone smaller than you were, and underneath all that fire is grief. The grief of not being heard, not being believed, not being allowed to break down when you needed it most. So the anger stayed, because at least it kept people at a distance, at least it gave you a sense of control, even if it cost you closeness. But what if your anger isn't the enemy? What if it's the last surviving part of you that refused to go numb? Before you silence it again, pause. Ask it, not with shame, but with curiosity. What were you trying to protect when you screamed? That answer might be the beginning of healing. What keeps repeating isn't fate, it's the past knocking on your door. There's a pattern you've noticed. The faces change, the places shift, but the feeling remains. The same disappointment, the same collapse, the same slow erosion of hope. You try to start fresh, you try to do better, but somehow the cycle always finds you again. And it's not because you're cursed or broken or unlucky. It's because the unconscious has no sense of time. It doesn't care if it's 2005 or 2025. It only knows one rule. What hasn't been healed must be repeated. Carl Jung called this the compulsion to repeat, a kind of invisible thread that ties us to the unresolved. You repeat not because you're weak, but because something in you still believes the ending can change, that maybe this time someone will stay, someone will listen, someone will love you without conditions. But the truth is, it's not about them. It's about what you still haven't faced inside yourself. Tarantino repeats too. Same themes, same aesthetic, same wounds, again and again. Not out of habit, but revelation. Because repetition reveals. It exposes what we didn't catch the first time. That's what your patterns are trying to do. They aren't just traps, they're messages, and maybe they'll keep appearing until you finally ask, what is this trying to show me that I've been refusing to see? This isn't about blame, it's about awakening. Because the loop ends the moment you stop walking it blindly. You're not lost, you're just too far from the self you abandoned. The world says you need to reinvent yourself, Change everything, start over, burn it all, and build again. But what if that's another performance? What if the constant reinvention is just another mask, shinier, more acceptable, less terrifying than simply remembering? Remembering who you were before you made yourself digestible, before you trimmed your soul to fit into what others could handle, before survival meant self-abandonment. You don't need to become someone new. You need to stop running from the version of you that already knew, the one who saw through the lies, the one who dared to feel deeply before feelings became liabilities. Montaigne once wrote, "The greatest thing in the world is to know how to be yourself, not to invent, not to imitate, just to be, in a way that doesn't tremble at the gaze of others." Tarantino never asked for permission. He didn't bend to what was trending. He carved out space where there was none, not because he needed approval, but because he refused to betray his essence. That's what remembering is. Not nostalgia, not regression. It's rebellion against every voice that told you your truth was too much, too strange, too raw. So sit for a moment. Strip the labels, drop the goals, forget what the world demands from you, and ask, not the outer self, but the one that hides in your chest, if no one expected anything from me, who would I be right now? The answer won't arrive in language. It will arrive in weight, in breath, in the sudden, fragile recognition that you were never gone, only buried. Every dark night is the womb of a new consciousness. It doesn't feel like birth when it happens. It feels like collapse, like losing everything you thought you were, like standing in a version of your life that no longer lets you breathe. But endings are rarely loud. They slip in like shadows, quiet, patient. And in that stillness, something ancient begins to stir, not in your mind, but deeper, in the place that feels before it thinks. Carl Jung once said, "The tree that reaches to heaven must have roots that touch hell." You wanted growth, you wanted healing, but not like this. Not through the nights that stripped you of your roles, not through the grief that turned your own voice against you, not through the loneliness that made you wonder if you even existed outside of what others needed from you. But the soul doesn't evolve through comfort. It evolves through confrontation. That's why your pain matters. Not because it defines you, but because it reveals you. Not because it's a sign of weakness, but because it's the only part of you that refused to go numb. What you're living through is not a flaw. It's not failure. It's not proof that you're broken. It's the raw material of rebirth, of rewriting, of returning, not to who you were, but to who you've always been beneath the scripts. You are not the roles they gave you. You are not the voice that punishes you. You are not even the thoughts you think in your worst moments. You are the one who sees all of this and survives it. So if you're still here, even in pieces, even in doubt, then there's still time to rewrite everything. You are not alone. And yes, there's still time to become real.